Hello, Over the Peak people. Now, this is early because at lunchtime I'm off to England for 1 week. So I won't be answering any comments or anything, and this one will kind of be for information and for you to think about and discuss among yourselves. I'm going to start off with Cullen Roche at Pragmatic Capitalism and an article entitled Hyperinflation, It's More Than Just Monetary Phenomenon. And there are 230 comments on there. And if you ever think that hyperinflation is a possibility where you are, read this article, and at the end of it, after you've read all the comments as well, you'll have a better idea. Hyperinflation is poorly understood. As its name might imply, most people believe hyperinflation is merely inflation on steroids, and goes on to say why it's not quite that. It is a particular thing in and of itself, as it were. And I've picked out a couple of PragCap's comment answers from the comment section. This is on treasuries. If the US government really wanted to, that's government and Fed Treasury to him is all the same. If the US government really wanted to keep rates low, they would simply name the long rate and challenge bond investors to try and bet against them. In other words, they just say what they want the 30-year to be. Say 4%, say 4%, and we're going to buy, like they do in the short end, to make it 4%. And every time some big swinging dick from Goldman Sachs tries to move interest rates higher, the Fed would come in and slam their faces against the concrete. After a few go-rounds, the traders would all learn their lesson and kneel at the altar of the Fed, just like they do at the short end. If they want to, that's what they can do. Another comment answer was, I agree, zero rates will end, ZERP, that we've got at the moment, but I tend to think they'll end for reasons that inflationists disagree with. I think the Fed will raise rates when they are comfortable with the economic growth, as opposed to some exogenous force moving rates higher against their will. In other words, the bond market, the people coming in and say, no, we want more interest. No. They'll move the rates higher when they think the economy can stand it, or the banks are recapitalized. So long as the Fed stays at zero and the economy looks fragile, I think the long bond will have a lot of trouble getting over 4%. So plenty of wonderful comments in that section. Moving on, new home sales, United States, calculated risk blog chart, and they're at a level which is about 250,000, which has not been seen since they've been keeping that chart, and that goes back to 1963. There is something terribly wrong. I keep saying that, don't I? Next one is composition of 2009 US gross domestic product, and it's interesting, this in many ways, because this is what makes up GDP, if you didn't know. But personal consumption, incredible, $10 trillion, that's the big red bar at the top. Government spending, $3 trillion, gross private investments, $1.5 trillion, exports, $1.5 trillion, imports, $2 trillion. Now, I think the interesting thing from that is a couple of things. Nation of shopkeepers, I think it was Napoleon called the Brits. You're just cutting each other's hair there, but it works, so we don't knock it. But if you take imports and balance them against exports, you've only got about half a trillion difference. It's a lot for your balance of payments and whatever, but it must be said that those exports are made in America. This is what I'm going to point out. They're made in America to ship them overseas, and they are balanced out by the imports. But we've got 500 billion to take off the 10 trillion. Meaning that of the top line, 9.5 trillion are all American goods and services bought and sold between Americans, made in America, sold to Americans, because we can see what the imports are on the bottom. So there's a huge internal US economy. Moving on, in a widely noted column in the Washington Post, Free Trade's great, but offshoring rattles me, for example, my Princeton colleague Alan Blinder wrote, "I'm a free trader down to my toes," and he really is, "always have been. Yet lately I'm being treated as a heretic by many of my fellow economists, and why? Because I have stuck my neck out and predicted that offshoring of service jobs from rich countries such as the United States to poor countries such as India may pose major problems for tens of billions of American workers over the coming decades. In fact, I think offshoring may be the biggest political issue in economics for a generation. When I say this, many of my fellow free traders react with a mixture of disbelief, pity, and hostility. Or hostility, I would think. Blinder, you have lost your mind. How will it be, this thing? When that red bar goes down because there is less things being done in America for Americans or for the rest of the world. Quick move over to China. China rare earths prices explode as export volumes collapse. Incredible, this really, in its own way. Chinese exports of rare earth metals, we knew they were reducing them, burst through the $100,000 per ton mark for the first time in February, up almost ninefold from a year before, while the volume of trade stayed far below historical averages. It is utterly incredible, the list of stuff that those rare earths need to go into. You want to build a windmill, wind turbine type thing. The list goes on and on. I should find the list, but I haven't got time today, sorry. Financial Times, Gavin Davis was editing the Alphaville yesterday, and this is one of the charts he's pulled out. The arrival of the emerging economies on the world scene is an event of breathtaking scale, and it is happening so quickly that it is hard to take in. Consider, finally, this graph. Graph, you see. Used to work for Goldman Sachs. Graph, not a chart. And you can say that the red, which is emerging markets, and the blue, which is developed countries, were still intertwangled in the year 00. And really, they've only blown apart in the last 10 years, and our brains aren't really up with that yet. But if you look at the trend, they really started trending apart 10 years before that. So for 20 years now, emerging markets have been on the up and we have been on the down. Gavin Davis again. It was a wonderful day with Gavin Davis guest editing Alphaville yesterday. Has global economic growth peaked? Now, all of this stuff, I'll read you these 4 lines because it gives you an idea about how his wonderful mind works and how so many other wonderful minds work. It is tempting to view recent setbacks as a natural response to the heightened uncertainty which has been caused by an extraordinary combination of exogenous shocks hitting the system. But these shocks will ultimately cause a bear market only if they are sufficient to cause a major slowdown in global economic activity. Basically, his mind thinks if something, these shocks could cause a bear market only if there's a major slowdown in global economic activity. That sounds tautological, but I mean, what I'll move on to this last chart, which I had a couple of days ago. This is how his mind thinks, and this is how all our minds probably all think because of the chart, and because our entire lives, our parents' lives and our grandparents' lives have lived through this chart. And the real GDP growth per capita thing going back to 1870 has been constantly going up and up and up and up and up, always going up. This is why back in the 60s and 70s they could have ideas of 2001 Space Oddity and things like that, and they thought we'd be in space and doing all sorts of wonderful things. But no, things are looking very similar than they did in the 70s. But would you like to go back and live in the 70s? Well, yeah, there are reasons for that, but Norm, you see what I mean? I mean, do you think people live better in the 70s or now? And although the poor haven't had, or the less highly paid haven't had many wage rises, ratioed here, there and everywhere, but they're doing all right. If you count things in televisions and cars and mobile phones and MP3 players and everything. For how many generations is that? Life has been going on the up and up and up constantly. Just bumps in for Great Depressions and world wars and whatever, but basically always on the up. And the only thing that tickles the back of my mind to say why and what's going on is that chart, and it starts in 1871. The use of rock oil. Gurgle, gurgle, up from the ground came a bubbling crude, was when 1850 to 1870 it really took off. And Gavin Davis, you, me, our parents, our children, all think bottom left, top right. We can't imagine that this could possibly end. But take away that bubbling crude and it could well might. It certainly I'm getting myself more and more convinced that 140 years of angular momentum bottom left top right is predicated on the black stuff. Okay, right, I'm going to try and get this up early because, as I say, lunchtime I'm off to England for 1 week. And so Monday week I'll be back with World Economic Newses. I'm going to do the birthday and mother thing and all the rest of that family stuff. So see you when I come back. The blog's open to you. Enjoy yourselves. Be good. Bye.